Organic Congress 2020, organised by IFOAM Organics Europe and BOEWL, and with great support by our sponsors. And now, please welcome your host, Joyce Möbius.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you back to the European Organic Congress, Organic in Action. We are very happy that you join us for the second and third day, but I'm pretty sure there are some newbies around. So let me introduce you to the event really quickly. This special digital edition of EOC 2020 is organized by IFOAM Organics Europe and the German Association of Organic Farmers, Food Processors and Retailers, BOEWL. And although we can't be together in one room today, we can still join in and interact. Let me really quickly show you how. Down on your screen, you can directly feedback with our emoji buttons. So thumbs up for a speaker or clap. If you want to try now, you will see all the emojis flying in. You can also join in and chat with us or amongst each other. Use our chat function. You find it on the right side of your screen. And of course, throughout the whole session today, you can send in questions. And even if we can't answer them all today, IFOAM and BOEWL are very happy to take them into account for future work. And whatever you comment or ask, please make sure you do it in a decent and nice way and in English, because that's our Congress language. If you're not so comfortable with English, you can switch to German. Use our settings button. You find them down on your screen. Sehr verehrte Damen und Herren, Sie können auch auf Deutsch zuhören. Unten im Fenster finden Sie ein kleines Rädchen. Dort ändern Sie die Spracheinstellungen. So ready? Any information you need? Go to our Congress website, organic-congress-ifomeu.org. Before we kick off now, let's have a view on the agenda of the day. Our closing debate for the EOC picks up the most discussed topic of 2020 so far, the corona pandemic, and discusses European organic agriculture and resilient food systems in a post-COVID world. First of all, we are very gratified that the European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Stella Kyriakides, kicks off our session with a video message. More European Commission coming right after Mrs. Kyriakides, with the Director of Strategy, Simplification and Policy Analysis, DG Agriculture, Anastasios Haniotis. We stay in Brussels then and are pleased that Thomas Weitz, Member of European Parliament and co-chair of the European Green Party, joins in with a statement. And another highlight following, the co-chair of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, Oliver de Schutter, shares his thoughts with us. Our next expert joins in from Great Britain. We are happy to have Sarah Compson, Soil Association and IFOAM Organics Europe with us. First round of statements completes Sébastien Traillère, Executive Director of the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. Speakers then join in to discuss our topic of the day, European organic agriculture and resilient food system in a post-COVID world. And as a last highlight of today and to complete our EOC 2020, Jan Plagge, President of IFOAM Organics Europe, and Felix Prinz zu Löwenstein, Chairman of BOEWL, will wrap things up for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, what a day. And you know who's going to be on stage now. Let's find out together who's behind the screens with us. Are you ready for our first interaction? So please answer the following question within the 10 seconds from start. The question is, which profession applies to you? You have 10 seconds from now. So the picture completes, as you can see, it's a various picture this morning who joins in. We hope for that because of that really broad topic we bring in for the last session. So great, thank you for participating. We want to know another thing from you. So same procedure, different questions, of course. Will the COVID-19 crisis result in policy decisions that will lead us towards more sustainable food systems that help to fight climate change? You can choose from 1, very pessimistic, to 5, very optimistic. You have 10 seconds from now. So I'm glad with a pretty optimistic audience today. Thanks for that, and keep it in mind when we kick off the discussion. So I think all muscles and brain cells are virtually stretched now. So let's start our closing session. I'm very delighted to present you your moderator. Please welcome the IFOAM Organics Europe Policy Manager and Deputy Director, Eric Gall. Hey there, Eric. Good morning. So good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Joyce. Nice to see you as well.
Yeah. So I wonder with COVID-19, when you think about the past month in the strange COVID-19 world, what's changed for you guys there in the European office in Brussels?
Well, I think the whole staff and IFOAM Organics Europe organization has shown a very impressive capacity to adapt to the circumstances and to remain efficient. On the other hand, of course, we miss the nice organic dinners we should have had with you guys in Berlin. But I think that even more importantly, in the bigger picture, it's also during the lockdown that the European Commission announced a target of 25% organic land by 2030. And I must say, for many of us, it felt like quite a historic moment and an important recognition of the benefits of organic farming for society and for the planet.
So you join in for the optimistic view then. Let's see how the broad picture will be in your session. So Eric, stage is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In this session, we will discuss if and how we can manage to build a different world after the COVID-19 crisis. This crisis has highlighted the crucial role that farmers, farm workers, processors, retailers, and food workers all along the production chain play to deliver essential goods to people. But it also highlighted some vulnerabilities of our current economic model, which is dependent on goods being produced on the other side of the world. So we heard calls for less globalization and for better routing of food systems at the local level through shorter supply chains as well. So political priorities have shifted from a sole focus on competitiveness and low prices to the need to ensure adequate funding to our public health systems for more justice and more solidarity, also at the European level with a proposed recovery plan. On the one hand, we have an economic crisis looming ahead of us, which might divert attention from the need to green our economies. But on the other hand, we also see a heightened awareness and a renewed sense of urgency on the need to make our food production systems more resilient and to address the causes of climate change, of a collapse of biodiversity, including deforestation, which is largely linked to our food system and was pointed as a cause of a resurgence of animal diseases. But because most of the challenges we need to address were already there before the COVID-19 crisis, it makes sense that the European Commission maintained its ambition to make the Green Deal an overarching policy of the European Union. And the Commission went ahead with the publication of a biodiversity strategy and of a farm-to-fork strategy, which precisely aim at transitioning to sustainable food systems by 2030. And the lead commissioner on the Farm to Fork strategy is Ms. Stella Kyriakides. So before we hear from our speakers what actions we should take to build sustainable and resilient food systems, we will first hear a video message from the commissioner prepared especially for our European Organic Congress. Before joining the European Commission, Stella Kyriakides was president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and she is still vice president of a party, the Democratic Rally of Cyprus. So here's the video message from the Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Stella Kyriakides.
Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago when I became European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, I committed to strengthening Europe's food systems and to ensuring that all Europeans have access to safe, healthy and nutritious food. Since then, we have been hit by COVID-19, the worst public health crisis in living memory. This Congress could not be timelier as Europe begins to reflect on the lessons learned and our next steps. Last month, we launched the Farm to Fork strategy, a vision to transform the way we produce, distribute and consume food, and to improve our health and environment. It is the first time in the history of EU food policy that such a comprehensive agenda is proposed, covering all stages of food production. It looks at food systems from both the consumer and the producer's point of view, and it puts them both at the center of our focus. Organic farming is one of the cornerstones of this vision. It is a practice that is environmentally sustainable and offers economic opportunities to Europe's farmers. It also responds to growing consumer demand for food production that respects our planet's boundaries. Organic is symbolic of the balance we are trying to achieve with the Farm to Fork strategy. Under Farm to Fork, we want to see the size of EU's agricultural land and organic farming increase to at least 25%. Yes, this is ambitious, especially given the different starting positions across member states. But you cannot bring change without ambition. We will put measures in place to ensure the supply for organic products meets consumer demand, to maintain the sector in equilibrium. This while ensuring a fair transition for farmers and turning challenges into business opportunities. The Common Agricultural Policy will continue to be a key tool in this process. The new CAP includes elements such as eco-schemes, which will provide targeted support for organic production. Member States can continue to support farmers through the rural development programs to maintain or to convert to organic production. In the context of the CAP strategic plans, we are putting in place structural dialogues. We will use these to encourage Member States to carefully assess their needs and make best use of the possibilities offered by the new agricultural policy to support their national organic sector. At the same time, we need to step up our efforts to stimulate a strong demand and uptake of organic products. Consumers are a real driver of change. Sustainability is bankable when consumers demand it. This is why we will promote organic food, support green public procurement, increase the share of organic products in public catering system, and expand organic canteens. Later this year, we will propose a new action plan for organic farming for the next 5 years, and this will be an important instrument to accompany future growth of the sector. We should grasp this opportunity for Europe's farmers and food producers to become global leaders in sustainability and guarantee the future of the EU food chain. Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago, I committed to the sustainability of food systems. No one could have predicted the pandemic that followed. But the obstacles only strengthen our conviction that it is crucial to ensure that we emerge from the pandemic with a more robust, secure and sustainable food system. with healthier food produced from a greener, more sustainable planet. Organic farming is without a doubt part of this solution, and I look forward to working with you to deliver this change. Thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you, European Commissioner. This is a very encouraging message, and it sounds like the Commission has a plan. From the point of view of IFOAM Organics Europe, the Farm to Fork strategy is exactly what we needed because it provides ambition and a clear direction for making our food systems more sustainable with organic at its heart. But of course, we will need to ensure that national governments share this ambition and take the measures necessary to make it a reality, especially through a CAP, like we discussed yesterday. And precisely, our next speaker is also from the European Commission and has a wealth of experience on the Common Agricultural Policy. Tassos Aniotis is Director for Strategy, Simplification and Policy Analysis in DG for Agriculture and Rural Development in the European Commission. He's held many other positions in the Commission over the years. Among other things, he was also Deputy Head of Cabinet of former European Commissioner for Agriculture, Franz Fischler, and Agriculture Counselor in the European Commission's delegation to the United States. So please welcome to our Congress our next speaker, Director of Strategy at DG Agriculture, Tassos Aniotis. Welcome to our Congress, Tassos. And I must say that you've been a regular guest and participant to our Congress and other events over the years, and sometimes you triggered lively debates with our audience. So I hope you are not tired of talking to the organic movement.
On the contrary, I'm very glad I'm back and I have the opportunity to speak to you, although it's a bit strange. I mean, usually the eye contact and the body language in congresses like that is the most important thing. Here you have an eye over a cyclop in front of you in the computer, but well, I think we will manage.
I'm sure we will. And now we are ready to hear your views on what should be the key measures to take to make European agriculture more sustainable and to transition to resilient food systems by 2030. Taking into account the lessons from the COVID-19 crisis. So please, Tassos, the stage is yours.
Thanks for the opportunity. Let me try to avoid repeating what others would have said and try to focus on three broad areas that in our view are going to be very crucial in trying to move towards a clearly more sustainable farming system. The first one has to do with the food chain as such. What we have seen with the COVID crisis is that the food system has had a remarkable level of resilience. That doesn't mean that there are no problems, and I will mention them, but it means that the capacity to keep distributing food amidst the most difficult situation is something that, especially in the European food system, reflects a level of sophistication and innovation. We need to build on that, but we need to improve it clearly. And here I would like to make a reference and a link with the challenges faced by the organic sector. Strengthening demand for organic products is going to be crucial in the success of our strategy. And in order to be able to do that, we need to have information going to the consumers that is going to be very clear in terms of all the sustainability claims that are out there, so that the organic sector is not going to face a competition that is not fair. That would allow consumers to have a very clear understanding of where their food is coming from and how it has been produced. And here I come to the second, the most crucial element in the area where the Common Agricultural Policy has a lot to do. That's the area that we have the leverage. It is extremely important to look not only in what will happen in the area that will grow into the organic sector, because we know very well that we need more area going to organic, and we know what needs to happen in the organic area. It is extremely important to improve the overall level of ambition in soil and in the treatment of land, because this is the way whereby all the European agricultural systems will increase their level of ambition, reduce their footprint, And in this environment, the organic sector will clearly find a way of moving forward. Let me come to the third point, which is also characteristic of the European food system. We focus very often in our presentations in the advantages that the Copernicus system provides in giving information that is transparent and free for everybody. The type of information that is given to us by information that we have on the ground with research projects, with innovation partnership, brings together knowledge that is extremely useful in moving into the next stage. And it is exactly in this particular area that I believe that the organic sector has a lot to contribute. Because the organic sector is like a living lab. It allows us to look at practices that we have forgotten or ignored, and what they bring in terms of allowing us to improve soil management, which brings benefits to air, to water and biodiversity, especially at the same time, while it tells us what works in specific environments and what potentially doesn't work in other environments. As Commissioner Kyriakides mentioned, the organic sector is part of the solution. If we need to bring the solution from all the sectors, the organic sector is at the frontier of these experiments that we have to make. And it would be extremely important to find ways of transferring the knowledge that is acquired by organic practices to other areas. And this is one of the particular priorities that we have put with the Farm to Fork strategy in terms of improving the capacity of the farm advisory systems of member states to bring the knowledge that is necessary to the farmers to make the next step. Because the transition from conventional to organic farming takes time and requires additional costs. And it's not only the additional support that will be provided that will count, it's also the manner by which we will be able to give answers to the producers when they tell us, we're ready to make the next step, please tell us how to do that. And this is going to be one of the most crucial tests I think we will have to face in order to be successful in our strategy and orientation.
Thank you for your statement, Tassos, and you made some very important points. But I have a follow-up question for you already, because we already discussed how the Farm to Fork strategy should lead to a transformation of a common agricultural policy, and the Commission has acknowledged this already. But how can the Commission ensure that Member States will trigger the necessary changes at the national level? How do you see the role of the Commission in the approval of the CAP strategic plans?
I think the first thing we have to do is start our discussion on the needs-based approach of member states by evidence. And we should not underestimate that evidence is available and it is transparent. Neither should we ignore the fact that already the member states started working in their analysis of what they consider to be their strengths and their weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats they have. And this is an exercise that takes place with stakeholders involved, not always in the extent that we would have liked, but I stress the fact that evidence is public. And this allows us to focus the debate on what is essential. First of all, what is essential at the EU level. This is why we define these 9 specific objectives, balancing the economic, the environmental, and the social aspects of the common agricultural policy. So we know where exactly to put the focus and what the big picture should be. Second, we allow flexibility to member states to give more emphasis on where they have their biggest priorities. Some will have to do it on water. Others will have to do it on soil erosion. Others will probably have to do it in finding ways of bringing more young farmers into the farming sector, and others in redistributing the support in such a manner that certain sectors or certain sizes of farming are more influenced than others. But I think at the end of the day, the very important point to keep in mind is that when we go and look at the strategic plans, we need to see an increase in the overall level of ambition at all levels and from all farming practices. And I think we should not underestimate the fact that we have concrete examples that there are practices and ways whereby both conventional agroecology, and more specifically the frontier organic farming practices, can at the same time improve the economic and the environmental efficiency of farming. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. We're not talking here about things that are futuristic or work only under specific lab environments. We're talking about things that take place on the ground, have shown concrete successes, and what we need to do is work a lot in terms of bridging the knowledge gap and the applications gap that exists and that doesn't allow us to generalize these successes.
Thank you very much, Tassos. I could not agree more. And thank you again for now. And please stay with us because you will be part of a panel later on.
I will. Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, you know that you can send us questions that will be answered by the panel at the end of the session. But now it is time to introduce our next speaker. Thomas Waits is from Austria, and Thomas is an organic farmer, a forester, and a member of a Green Party. Since 2017, he's been a member of a European Parliament, and since November 2019, he is the co-chair of a European Green Party together with Evelyn Hudberg. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next guest, member of a European Parliament and co-chair of a European Green Party, Thomas Waits. Welcome to our Congress, Thomas. It seems that we have more and more organic farmers who are elected members of a European Parliament. Do we have any idea how many of you are sitting in the Parliament now?
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Eric. No, actually not. I must say in the Agricultural Committee, there are several farmers, but very few organic farmers. So I think that's not the reason why the Parliament and the Commission looks into organic farming today. I see different reasons on that.
Good. Well, we will hear from you about that. So I will ask you the same question as for Tassos. According to you, what measures should we take to make European agriculture more sustainable and to transition to sustainable food systems by 2030? Thomas, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Eric. Let's have a look into the learnings that we have from that current crisis now. I mean, we're not through the crisis, by far not, so our learnings are still going on. I think one of the most important developments that also serve our interest as organic farmers is that the awareness on health issues has risen substantially across Europe. Sure, you can say, well, in times of such a virus crisis, health becomes a crucial part of the public debate. But it's not only linked to medication, vaccines, or the question on how can I infect myself. We also see that this debate spreads on other fields on what is a healthy food, what is a healthy food production, how is it linked to biodiversity troubles that we have these zoonotic diseases in our societies the last 15 years. This is not the first case that we see here. And so if you start to talk about health, you're immediately there when talking about food, talking about also a food system that either makes you healthy or environment. And so this is one of the most important developments that I see as a learning. The second question that is debated in a different quality in the European Parliament, but also in the Commission, is the security of supply, where citizens suddenly witness that it's not given that you go to the supermarket and you will always find whatever you imagine you could need. So the question whether Europe is able to sustain its citizens with food supply on a long term and in an independent way from other regions of the world is currently in the center of debate. That means citizens realize that we're depending on massive soy importation, protein crops from abroad, that we're depending on artificial fertilizer, which is produced with gas abroad. So we're depending on many levels on global markets. And this is causing real concerns, even in, I would say, circles which may be surprising to this audience here. I'm not only member of the Agricultural Committee, but also of the Foreign Policy and Defense Committee. And that if you see suddenly former defense ministers starting to realize that this is a security issue, whether Europe is able to sustain food for its citizens, then you realize there's allies there that we have not foreseen earlier. And then we have to talk about, well, what does security of supply, and what is the question that is linked to productivity there? In the first months of the COVID crisis, we've seen a major push from basically fossil oil industry, but also, let's say, conventional agro industry, a major push to get rid of all these green policies with the argument, well, now in such a situation, it must be about productivity, productivity, productivity. The problem is that this argumentation only looks on only one question. How many tons of crops am I taking off a hectare of fields with my tracker? But this is a very short term. In times of climate crisis that we have, the question is not anymore whether you can make a lot of tons in a good year. The question is, how can you still produce food in extreme weather conditions, with droughts, with floods, with extreme also temperature changes? How are we still able to start production? And there we are at all the questions around organic agriculture and agroecology as such. I think many of you have witnessed concrete in the landscape in summers of drought that are being next to each other, differ a lot in whether they're still able to sustain the plants growing there with water and minerals. You see that a soil that has a lot of humus is able to store a lot more water. A field that has been treated with green cover, with green fertilizer, a field where the farmers have invested for years and years to build up a lot of natural fertility, are even in drought summers able to sustain the crops. So the question is, how much do you harvest if you have a drought? And there you see organic agriculture and agroecological models are at the very forefront of solutioning food security to our citizens. And you may have heard it already. The security question is heavily linked to the question on how to tackle climate crisis. So it's not only about how do we maintain food production under these changing conditions, but also what can we do to actually limit climate change, to actually reduce the impact of global warming, to actually counter this development. And there I again raise a point which will come stronger later, so I will not go too much in details, but the Commission, but also the industry has realized that the most efficient and most effective way to sequester CO2, to get CO2 out of the atmosphere, is with plant growth. It's about plants that collect CO2 from the atmosphere via using sunlight and collect the CO2, and through plowing it in or plowing parts in, let's say the residues, you actually sequester actively CO2 into the soil. I don't know any reasonable other way to get CO2 back out of the atmosphere, which hasn't got major risks like carbon capture and storage or industrial models. So that also explains why partly the business sector, the industry, is in the favor of greening European agriculture suddenly, because they have realized that this is actually the most effective and cheapest way to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. And yes, it may be not the most, let's say, kind argument in that term. It's a very commercial and economic argument. But I must tell you, I'm happy to even have this support from their side, even if I know that the support for this kind of sequestration comes from clearly business interest background. Maybe I just reflect also on what the Commission was proposing. I must tell you, me as a green politician, I find myself in a surprising situation, standing next to the Commission and next to the commissioners, defending the Green Deal, defending farm-to-fork strategy, defending biodiversity strategy against attempts of part of the industry, mainly the fossil industry, which is a pretty new experience for a green opposition politician in the parliament. I just want to point out one or two fields where I think, well, the presentation was a bit overly optimistic. The current agriculture policy, also the proposal that we have negotiated before the last European elections, before biodiversity strategy was launched, is only partly covering what we need to actually do in action on the ground. And it has not been aligned with the farm to fork strategy. There is loopholes. There's the question of renationalization. So the union handing over the responsibility more to the national states and not proposing concrete measurements, rather goals. The question whether there will be a midterm review if countries actually meet the goals they were proposing. And the question, what happens if they do not? What does that mean? Don't they get common agricultural policy money in that case? So there's still actually a lot to do to align the common agricultural policy proposal for the future to the farm to fork strategy and to the biodiversity strategy. There's still work to do there. But one thing is really encouraging for us in the European organic sector. These clear statements coming from the Commission that say organic agriculture is at the forefront of solution. It's at the forefront of tackling climate change, biodiversity crisis, and the needs of European citizens on securing food supply, securing healthy food supply. So thank you all very much for staying on track, for pushing forward for European agriculture in an organic manner. You have me on your side. I'm very proud of the movement, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Thomas. You made some very important points, and you even started the panel discussion in a way. I still have another question for you, but please be short in your reply because we're a bit over time. The Greens have called for a system change for years, so now do you expect to receive more support for your propositions from the other groups, political groups in the European Parliament?
Yes, definitely. We see that on a daily basis. You know, the question on sustaining food production, the question on finding ways of cooperating with nature in the way we do farming is not an ideological question. If you want to secure a planet or a European continent for the next generations, this is the way to go. And it's science-based, it's knowledge-based, it's experience-based. So this is not an ideological question. And we see allies in all political groups and strong debates. And I mean, you see the proposals from the Commission. And as you know, we have one, let's say, green-minded or dedicated green commissioner. All the others are from other parties. This awareness has spread substantially, which we welcome a lot.
View, Thomas, and the CAP negotiation will be indeed a test for what you say. But for now, thank you very much, and please stay with us because we will have a panel later on. And now I have a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Olivier de Schutter is co-chair of an international panel of experts on sustainable food systems, IPES Food, but he's also the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. In the past, he also served already as UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food from 2008 to 2014 and was elected to the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights from 2014 to 2020. So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome our next guest from IPES Food, Olivier de Schutter. Welcome to our Congress, Olivier. We are very happy and grateful to have you with us today. Let me ask you one question first. You've been involved with the UN system, and you still are. You also co-funded IPES Food to influence European policies, but I know you were also a candidate in my commune where I live in Ixelles. So tell me, please, what is your secret to be active on all these fronts?
Thank you. Good morning to all, and good morning, Eric. Thank you for convening this panel. Interesting question. I think one of the reasons why IPES Food was launched, not to influence European policies exclusively, but inter alia, was to emphasize the need for a much more joined up approach to reforming food systems from the local to the European and international. And during the campaign we led between 2016 and 2019 for what we provocative for the EU, we emphasized inter alia that point, the need to reconcile the governance of food systems from the local municipal level to the regional, member state and European levels. And this is because the change in food systems requires that the many local initiatives, social innovations that are provoking the emergence of alternative food systems at local level should be better supported by member state and European level policy. And so this campaign was a very interesting moment, I think, also from the point of view of European democracy. We had some 250 actors of food systems across Europe joining efforts to push a demand for a food policy to emerge at the EU level. And together, this campaign brought environmental NGOs, development NGOs, farmers' unions, consumer organizations, in other terms, many actors who did not usually work together, but who found a common interest in demanding change in food systems because the change is important for environmental reasons, in order to support small-scale farmers and to slow down the rate at which small farm units disappear, and is important for health reasons to improve the health and nutrition of the eaters at the end of the chain. And so it was a European-wide campaign.
Yeah, I'm sorry because
bringing together many actors. And so we were absolutely delighted when in December 2019, the Commission announced its Green Deal and mentioned the Farm to Fork strategy as part of this. And very, very pleased to read the Farm to Fork strategy presented on 20th of May, which Commissioner Stella Kyriakides already described. And so that is the long answer, I suppose, to your question as to why the local matters as much as the European level.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And indeed, IFOAM Organics Europe was part of this campaign. But now I will give you the full stage to hear more from you about what we need to do to transition to sustainable food systems. So please, Olivier, the full stage is yours now.
Perhaps I would like to say a few words about what was behind this campaign for common food policy and what is following this campaign, the reading we have of the Farm to Fork strategy. Let me recall that this campaign had essentially three objectives when it was launched in 2016. The first objective was to encourage a transition from the system we have, which is basically inherited from the choices made back in the 1960s as to how to manage food security in Europe, to an agroecological transformation based on the idea that we need to reduce the dependence of food production on fossil energy, that we need to better protect the health of consumers, and that we need to improve the ability for soils to capture carbon and to function as carbon sinks. So that was the first objective we pursued. The second objective was to integrate different sectorial policies that until now are dealt with separately within different DGs according to different paradigms and that are not sufficiently converging until now. The agricultural policies in the areas of environment, of health, of employment, the trade policy, all these policies until now have not been coordinated well enough. So what we claimed is that we need an umbrella strategy covering all these sectorial policies that have an impact on how we produce food and which food we eat. In other terms, that impact the food environment. And thirdly, is the governance of transition. Action plan with indicators to measure progress, with a monitoring of the progress that is achieved, and with an ability, therefore, to coordinate change across different policy areas so that they can become mutually supportive. And so this was the key, these were the key messages of the campaign we led during 3 years, developed in a very bottom-up by a large number of organizations across Europe. And it was part of the inspiration for the Farm to Fork strategy that the Commission presented on 20th of May. Now, this is a very important initiative, of course, of the European Commission, presented jointly with its strategy on biodiversity. And I would like to commend Commissioner Stella Kyriakides and more generally the European Commission and Vice President Timmermans for their leadership in this regard. I think the Farm to Fork strategy is important for essentially 3 reasons. First, it adopts a chain-wide approach from farm to fork, from producers to consumers. And that is extremely important because you cannot demand change to be made by producers if you don't also ensure that they have access to markets and that consumers will reward their efforts to move to sustainable modes of production. Secondly, the Farm to Fork strategy recognizes the role of the food environment in shaping how we eat, how we consume. Instead of the usual calls for individual consumers to behave responsibly, there's a recognition that our choices are formatted by the environment in which we operate, and that the full environment surrounding the consumer should be changed. That is, again, extremely important. And thirdly, I have great hopes that the common agricultural policy shall be better aligned in the future with the objectives of the Green Deal, and the Farm to Fork strategy should serve that purpose. And I very much welcome the powerful, the strong statements by my friend Tassos Haniotis earlier on this panel concerning this much needed alignment with of the CAP with the Green Deal. Of course, our role is also to be very vigilant and critical of what is proposed in order to make sure that we remain on track. And there will be very powerful counter forces that will make it difficult for the Commission to deliver fully on its promises. And let me highlight perhaps very briefly 4 points on which we have to be particularly attentive for the future. As we know, the Farm to Fork strategy is only one step towards reforming food systems for them to become sustainable, and we expect from the Commission further steps to be taken. First of all, the strategy as it is currently outlined does not provide a solid governance for transition because it does not emphasize the need for food democracy. With others, we propose that at EU level, we establish a food policy council, and the European Economic and Social Committee and others, including the Committee of the Regions, have also advocated for this. And this would mean a consultative forum where all major stakeholders of food systems in the EU would be represented to ensure that decisions that are made concerning the shape of food systems would be better informed by the views of these actors, would be more legitimate, and would be able to build better on the social innovations from these actors. And unfortunately, the governance dimension, the food democracy dimension, is for the moment quite absent from the strategy as it is proposed. And the risk is that we remain, therefore, in a very path-dependent approach to reforming food systems, in which the major incumbents shall have a de facto veto power on any significant change. Number 2, we must strengthen the link between the transition performed or attempted at EU level internally. The strategy has a few interesting paragraphs on the need to make the sustainable development chapters of free trade agreements negotiated by the EU more robust under the supervision of the EU Chief Trade Enforcement Officer. But we need to go beyond this. We need to make sure that the trade policies support producers in the EU and support consumers in the EU so that producers and consumers adopt more sustainable forms of production and consumption. And this will not be possible if we expose our producers to unfair competition from abroad, and if we lead the consumers to opt for low-cost options despite the impacts on social and environmental norms. And so we need to much better link trade policies to our quest for social and ecological transition in the EU. Thirdly, I believe that the farm to fork strategy, although it has great merit, is still not tapping the full potential of social innovations at the local level. In our 3 years long campaign, we went to many cities across Europe, including Montpellier, Freiburg in Germany, Turin, Milan, others. And we noted that in many cases, cities were trying to develop local food systems and felt that they were not supported by EU level policies, policy frameworks or regulatory frameworks. And we need to allow for these local initiatives to prosper, to be supported by EU level schemes. And I believe that this relocalization and re-territorialization of food systems, linking better local producers to local consumers, should be further built upon. Fourth and finally, I think the farm to fork strategy is perhaps not explicit enough about how we are going to manage the dilemma between, on the one hand, the idea that we must make low-cost food options available for low-income households, and on the other hand, the need to strengthen the ability for all families to have access to adequate diets, not by reducing the price paid to farmers and not by allowing producers to externalize the negative externalities, but instead by protecting low-income families with strong social protection, with a stronger enforcement of minimum wage legislation. In other terms, low-cost food is not a substitute for social policies that protect all families in their access to adequate diets. But the dilemma between combating food poverty on the one hand and encouraging sustainable production and consumption on the other hand, this dilemma is not really addressed heads-on by the farm to fork strategy. And it shows, I believe, the need for a long-term, multi-year strategy to develop so that gradually adequate diets that support planetary health is also affordable, natural, and easy to adopt for all European citizens. And with this, I would like to thank you again for your invitation, and I look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Olivier, for sharing your analysis with us. And I must say you already replied to the question I wanted to ask you about the European food policy, so that's perfect. And we'll hear from you again indeed in the panel discussion. So thank you again. And for now, I will introduce you to our next speaker and our first female speaker of the session, Sarah Compson, who is currently International Development Manager at the Soil Association based in the UK, where she has worked on research and development of new standards, as well as on the implementation of the association's work around organic textiles. In addition to this, Sarah held the position of coordinator for IACB, the International Accredited Certification Bodies, since 2017. But Sarah is also chair of the interest group of organic processors and traders within IFOAM Organics Europe. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next guest from the Soil Association and IFOAM Organics Europe, Sarah Compson. Welcome to our Congress, Eric. Sarah. Good morning.
Hi, thank you.
And I already have good news for you, because I will not be asking you any question about Brexit. How do you feel about that?
Oh, well, that's excellent. Although you've got to be careful what you wish for, because when I used to think, I wish people would ask me about something else other than Brexit, I didn't want a different crisis to replace it. So
that's a good point. But for now, I will ask you the same question as our other speakers. According to you, what are the key actions we should take to make European agriculture more sustainable and to transition to sustainable food systems? So please, Sarah, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So we've already heard a number of really interesting perspectives on resilient food systems in a post-COVID world. And no doubt everyone listening will have their own take too. And I would like to just add a little more food for thought into the discussion. So I want to briefly talk about the lessons I think we need to learn, how EU agriculture should evolve, and what policymakers could do to build a more sustainable and resilient European food system. So in terms of lessons then, the crisis, first and foremost, has really highlighted this deep interconnection that exists between things. For example, the crisis wouldn't exist at all without globalization, and it wouldn't have been made worse if our nations were healthier. In the UK, the death toll is likely to have been heightened by the prevalence of obesity and type 2 diabetes across the population, and that's closely linked to an unhealthy diet. Another lesson that the crisis has taught us is the true meaning of resilience and resilient food systems, which others have already touched upon. And I would say to this point that striving for efficiency, achieved with myopic focus at almost all other costs, is not fit for purpose. True resilience is a lot more complicated. It needs to take into account many factors and encompass considerations of climate, nature, and health. We've learnt that to make our food systems really fit for purpose, they need to be restructured in ways that give food sovereignty more prominence. Supply chains have to be equitable, food producers and workers in a chain must be properly valued, and food needs to be produced in ways that address the climate and nature emergency that we face. It's been said many times, it's not an original thought, but the COVID crisis is indeed a tiny dress rehearsal for the much bigger crisis that we're facing, which is climate change. And like all good dress rehearsals, we need to reflect on our performance and respond with ways of doing things better. So then on to how EU agriculture could and should evolve. I think broadly it needs to do two things. It not only needs to be fit for purpose in responding to the inevitable shocks ahead, including the looming climate crisis, but it also needs to be more ambitious in actively trying to mitigate these shocks and crises, so taking a more positive upfront approach. There is still time to do this, but we do need to take action now. So we need these agricultural production systems that can do more than just cope. And they also need to mitigate, with prevention and positive health gaining much greater priority and prominence. We need an approach to EU agriculture that ideally does both at the same time. And this is why organic is important, as it can and does achieve just that. And it's the reason why it's got prominence in the Food to Fork strategy. And that's because organic isn't just a market or a set of rules. It is a whole movement, and the foundational principles of health, ecology, fairness and care speak to the fact that organic systems are founded on principles that recognize this interconnection and this systems approach, which is necessary for true resilience. To give some examples that are a bit less abstract, we can just take a look at what happens on organic farms. As Thomas mentioned earlier, you can see a range of farming practices that contribute to resilience, such as the promotion of biological diversity, which is important because we know that diversity brings strength. Organic farming also encourages the preservation of natural ecosystems, and it's fundamentally rooted in good soil health, which leads to more resilient crops. Ultimately, whatever the shape EU agriculture takes in the next few years, it needs to evolve in a way that means we can positively answer the following three questions. Firstly, is our food system diverse and robust enough to feed our citizens a healthy diet in times of crisis? Secondly, is enough being done to support truly resilient food systems that join those dots between climate, nature, and health, and which are fair and equitable? And thirdly, we need to really be able to question whether our food systems are contributing or mitigating the risks that we face. But then in terms of what policymakers can do, we need to consider resilience in terms of the framing that I've outlined. So resilience must encompass these considerations of health, ecology, fairness and care. We must actively support organic and other agroecological approaches that directly answer the call to bring holistic solutions to systemic problems. And finally, we need to be bold and courageous, because no one is going to thank us for being overcautious and tentative, considering what's at stake over the next 10 years. The decisions that we make now will set the course for humanity and the future of the living world. And so there's no greater time for making sure the actions that we take are meaningful and substantial. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your strong words. And maybe could you say a little bit more about what are the specific answers and solutions that the organic movement could bring to the table?
Yeah, well, it's been great to hear such a good recognition and support for organic as being able to provide some of these solutions. And as I try to outline a little bit, I think it's all rooted in this fundamental idea of holistic solutions to systemic problems. And that really needs to underpin our approach to the future. And those foundational principles of organic, health, ecology, fairness and care, they really need to shape the future of food and farming across all food systems, not just organic. And that, which was mentioned earlier, organic is kind of a model that can apply and be used in a range of agricultural settings. It's not just about trying to make our own little world better. And I think IFOAM EU has done a great job of setting out a three-pronged vision for the organic sector that holds together even greater resonance and relevance in a post-COVID world. And it offers somewhat of a blueprint for resilient recovery. I know that you're very familiar with it, Eric, but just to summarize, these three prongs are organic on every table, and that calls for recognition and promotion of organic and easy access to it for all citizens. The second prong, improve, inspire and deliver, includes a vision for resilient food and farming systems that contribute to delivering healthy diets and that which connects society with food and farming. And then finally, fair play, fair pay, which is this equity picture. And that's about a roadmap for recognizing and rewarding true value in food systems and promoting those business models and funding systems that more truly account for the cost of food. So I think it's very clear that organic has a lot to offer, and the time is certainly now.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for reminding us of the relevance of the vision that IFOAM Organics Europe developed already a few years ago to make European agriculture more sustainable. So thank you once again, but please stay with us because you will be part of a panel later, okay?
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Sarah. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to remind you that you can keep on sending us questions for the panel to answer later on. But now it is time to hear from our last speaker, Sébastien Treyer, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, IDRI, based in France. Sébastien holds a PhD in Environmental Management, and he is a specialist in foresight for public policies and international negotiations on sustainable development. Previously, as a civil servant for the French Ministry of Environment, he was in charge of foresight, and he also coordinated the Agrimonde Foresight exercise, which is about how to feed the world in 2050. That was before he joined IDRI back in 2010 as Director of Programs. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next guest, the Executive Director of IDRI, Sébastien Treyer. Welcome to our Congress, Sébastien. And I must say that I hear from you a lot these days because very often when I turn on the French radio, I can hear you or other colleagues from IDRI sharing their analysis. So does it mean that the influence of IDRI is growing up on the French intellectual scene?
So I'm the first one. I'm the first one to have done the.
It's better now.
Good morning, guten Morgen. I'm the first one to have done the bad job of unmuting. Sorry for that. I was just saying that we are very happy at IDRI to be able to be very active at the European scale, but also recently very much at the French scale with the Citizens' Convention on Climate. There has been a lot of debates, and particularly what that means for the food systems. So yes, this is a matter of importance, and the citizens have been passionate. They've been also very ambitious in the way they set the scene for what should be the next vision for the French food systems in the framework of the European food system.
It's true that there is a lot happening also in France, but now we would like to hear from you. What are your views on the key priorities to make European agriculture more sustainable and to transition to sustainable food systems, also taking into account the lessons from this COVID-19 crisis? So, Sébastien, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I want to stress three lessons from the crisis, and I have therefore three messages. My first message is that climate, biodiversity, global health are just one global good, one global commons, and we need to tackle the root causes of the crisis, which means tackling the drivers of climate, biodiversity. They need to be tackled jointly. Preventing the next crisis is about land use change, deforestation, but it's also about livestock, intensive livestock systems. The globalized food systems plays a critical role in this, and we know the goal. It's to preserve climate, biodiversity, and global health, but we need to reinforce our understanding of this and what are the pathways to get there. So that was my first message. The second message is that it's precisely about the pathway to get there. Take into account vulnerability of our societies, of our economic systems, is a major lesson from the crisis, as speakers have said. We need to put a lot of emphasis on building in more resiliency to our societies and economies. But this is very important because before the crisis, one of the blocking factors of transitions towards an agroecological systems and more sustainable food systems was the fact that resilience and the redundancies and the diversification of resilience entails were considered only as a necessary cost that we could not afford in a world of global competition, economies of scale, and massification. Now, after the crisis, I believe that resilience and avoiding risks is becoming very important for the financial sector, for the investors, and it's now integrated into the financial equation. That means that can open up a way for critical options of transformations that we were advocating for before, like closing nutrient cycles at regional scale, diversifying, despecializing regions, the recomplexification of crop rotations, which is a necessity if we want to get rid of pesticides, recomplexification of agriculture, particularly rebuilding a plant protein supply chain that would be integrated in regional economies. So that becomes possible because now if we integrate risks into the equation and resilience into the financial equation, this supposed extra cost is now worth investing in. My third message is about the policies. We know the goal. We have an idea that what could be triggering the transition because the blocking factor is now could be removed because we are caring more about resilience. What are the policies and how do we assess the policies to do so? So I concur with all the former speakers that the biodiversity strategy, to fork strategy in the framework of the Green Deal is extremely good news. It sets clear and ambitious goals on climate, biodiversity, but also on organic farming, and that's very important. I concur with Olivier de Schutter on the fact that the Farm to Fork strategy has this food system, food environment perspective that matters a lot. But my criticisms or my points of attention are on the food Farm to Fork strategy needs to be clearer on 2 points. First, on policy coherence, drive cap payments, national strategic plans towards the objectives that were set by the Green Deal. That's the first point. And the second point on which I want to insist is the fact that we need to have a much clearer emphasis on the deployment of industrial strategies and the structuring of value chains. For instance, as I've said, on plant protein value chains. We need to accompany also the reconversion of because there are going to be massive changes in some of the industries, I think particularly of the animal production value chains. And we need to care for decent jobs that are going to be a key question because of the crisis and because these value chains are already very fragile today. We need to think of decent jobs for farmers and farm workers, but also in these agri-food industries, in slaughterhouses, in logistics, in retailing. These are the key jobs in the industries that we have, because these are the industries, the agri-food industries in regions are the ones that we have kept despite the deindustrialization in the EU. So having decent jobs in these industries and the job intensity is really related to having quality products, to move up market, to have a differentiation strategy. This is why I believe we need to have an eye on the social dimension of these policies, because this is going to be a key matter for the years to come. And it's really linked to the fact of moving up market in the quality, in safety, in environmental sustainability of the products. So the Green Deal is an opportunity for social and green reconstruction of the whole sector, that because there are lots of economic viability questions to the agri-food sector, even before the crisis or before we think of transition. So let's take the Green Deal to push that in that direction. Thank you very much. And I hand it back over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for sharing your analysis with us as well. And you mentioned the Green Deal, and I have a question for you in this respect, because the idea is that there would be a EU recovery plan of 500 billion euros as well. In your view, is the Green Deal compatible with the EU recovery plan, or what should we do to make sure that this money will contribute to the objectives of a Green Deal?
For me, the Green Deal is the right horizon to orientate the recovery plan of Europe and of the member states, the distinct recovery plans, that they are aligned and into the same long-term direction. So I don't think that this is going to be a problem. This money is just the one and same direction. I'm a little bit worried about the fact that we need also to align all the gap payments with the same direction. What I see in the recovery plan of Europe is that we would have an extra money on the second pillar, but I'm very interested in seeing that the first pillar payments are really orientated towards the recovery plans, the green reconstruction that we have, and assessing the adequacy of the national strategic plan with the environmental objectives that has been already tackled before by some of my colleagues. This is going to be particularly key. Who will assess that? What expertise and who has the political legitimacy to do so? That needs think tanks, civil society, parliaments at national scale and European scale to be involved in that endeavor to make that really the alignment for the Green Deal.
Thank you, Sebastian. And indeed, like it was mentioned previously as well, we need new forms of governance to make sure that civil society and citizens are fully involved in how this money will be distributed. But please stay with us, because that brings us to our panel discussion now on European agriculture and resilient food systems in a post-COVID-19 world. So, ladies and gentlemen, please keep on sending your question. They will get answered in a couple of minutes. And now it's time to welcome back our speakers from before. So we have from IFOAM Organics Europe and the Soil Association, Sarah Compson, joining us again. We will have from IPES Food, Olivier de Schutter as well. From the European Parliament, Mr. Thomas Waits, and last but not least, from the European Commission, Director of DG Agriculture, Tassos Aniotis, back with us for the panel. So welcome back, everybody. I want to make sure that we can still all hear you. Sarah, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Very good. Is Olivier here? I'm not sure I can see him. Olivier, are you here? Oh. Okay. Well, hopefully he will be back at some point. Thomas, where are you calling us from?
I've left my farm due to the lack of internet connectivity to my base in Vienna. But I'm going to go back to my farm tonight to do my beekeeping stuff, which is high season now.
That's very nice. Tassos is still with us. Can you hear us, Tassos?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm still in the office.
Very good. And Olivier is back, which is great. So at some point, there will be questions from the audience that will appear on the screen. And that. Okay, I'm told we already have questions. So let's start with the first question then. which is hard for me to read on the screen, I must say. So, do you expect the developments we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis to stay? Or do you think that in a couple of months we'll be back to business as usual, so to speak? Wants to give his feeling on that. Maybe, Sarah, would you like to have a go at it? How do you see the situation evolving?
It's a really hard one to call. I think if we consider human nature, we like to go back to what we know and what we're comfortable with. But at the same time, many European citizens have been very clear that actually they don't want to go back to business as usual. And to cheekily include the UK in Europe for a moment, a recent survey found that 9% of UK citizens wanted to go back to business as usual. So, that's 91% of people that don't. So I think there's a huge opportunity to do things differently and to do things in a greener way. I'm a natural optimist, so I would say that our chances are good, but we need to make a concerted effort to make sure that the changes that have happened and also the vision for a greener recovery are really followed through.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your views on that. And I have a question for Tassos now, coming back to what was said by some participants in the discussion. Because Sebastian mentioned the need for diversification and recomplexification of our food production. And Olivier also mentioned the need for a whole supply chain approach as well. So my question for you, Tassos, and it's a difficult one, I know, but what do you see in the European policies, the farm to fork, or the future CAP, or the recovery plan, that can ensure that we will have a whole food production supply chain on board to bring the necessary changes to make our food system more resilient? Tassos?
Yeah, thanks for the difficult question. That's why we're here, actually, in the Commission, to try to solve these issues. First of all, I would like to say that, when you talk, and from your perspective positions, what you say is not things that we don't agree with. The difficulty that we face is how exactly we put this in practice in a policy framework where we can make proposals, but other institutions are going to make the decisions. And this is why, for me, and I know I have been accused sometimes of being a veteran and slow and all this, for me, what is important is three very concrete principles in introducing reforms. The first thing is we have to make sure that we don't go backwards. And I agree with what Sarah said, that after this crisis is not going to be business as usual. The second thing, and that's where I don't become always very popular, is that we need to understand that there is going to be some gradual development. Things are not going to change overnight. And if we guarantee that we don't go backwards, what is going to be very important in this gradual development is to pick up exactly the examples that are going to convince people that there is a new way of doing business that is better. And that's why I always insist in the transfer of knowledge of the best practices that work on the ground. And third, and that's where I believe things could really improve and a lot, is there comes a point where if these practices are shared, there's going to be an acceleration of the reform path. We should not expect that things are going to be linear, but we should prepare the ground so when people start realizing that what we discuss academically or theoretically works on the ground, these things are going to move fast. And that's, for me, is the very crucial dilemma we face right now. What are we going to get out of the lessons we have learned from the current crisis that will buy in people from the consumers to the producers that we have done something different than this time around can work? And I bring here my experience from the other major crisis I faced when I was in Fischler's cabinet, which is the mad cow disease. We didn't go back to a business model that all of you on the panel are going to agree, including myself, by the way. But we went back into a system that made major improvements with respect to what we had in the past. With all the contradictions, but we made it. And that's what we need to work right now also.
Thank you, Tassos. And yeah, it's not precisely what we need to do in terms of policy is not always, we don't always have easy answers for that, but You mentioned alternatives, and Olivier also mentioned that there is already a lot of innovation taking place at the local level. I wonder, Olivier, do you have concrete policy proposals on how to make the most of this innovation at the local level and how to strengthen and develop shorter supply chains in Europe, Olivier?
Thank you, Eric. I think it's part of the lessons from the COVID-19 crisis that insistence on long supply chains, on economies of scale, on efficiency gains linked to the division of labor and the specialization of each region have their limits. This, of course, has been developed in past years as a means to promote efficiency in production. But it is at the expense of resilience. It is at the expense of the diversification of production on particular territories. And I think now there is a realization we perhaps have gone too far in that specialization of regions. So what we need to do is to diversify production at local level, basically produce more of what we consume in each region and consume more of what we produce in each region. And that means linking local farmers with local producers, working with these regions that are trying to do this, but that find that the insistence of EU policy and legislative frameworks on non-discrimination, on undistorted competition across the internal market may be an obstacle to that relocalization. And I think typical of this is the many dialogues we had with schools and public administrations about public procurement rules that are now sidelined by governments who realize that they are an obstacle to this relocalization of food systems. And so they cheat, basically, to circumvent the 2014 directive on public procurement in the EU in order to effectuate this shift. So I think we really need a paradigm shift. Instead of imposing uniformity and homogeneity and undistorted competition, we need the EU to support diversity and to support local innovation. And that requires a change in policy and legislative frameworks when they are an obstruction to those social innovations that push for relocalization of solutions.
Thank you, Olivier. And it's clear that, first of all, we should probably tackle some of these barriers to change. And first of all, we probably need a review, indeed, like you say, of competition policy. I wonder if we have questions from the audience coming, because I have more questions on my side, but please put them on screen. Yes, there is one. Okay. What concerns you regarding the post-COVID-19 crisis, specifically for the food and agriculture sector? I think I will address this question to Thomas. Do you have specific worries about the impact of a crisis on the food production chain? I don't know, on restaurants, catering, or things like that, Thomas?
Well, I'm overly optimistic that we are moving towards the right direction. But I just to mention a concrete example, one of the keys I see to foster consumption of locally produced food is the question on declaration. So in several countries, but also in my home country, Austria, we're heavily fighting, even together with the conservative farmers associations, for a labeling of origin of meat, eggs, and milk in the gastronomy, in the restaurants. And there you see an obstacle that comes from the crisis, as this sector is heavily under pressure through lockdown. Many of these enterprises are really at the edge of closing down. And there's a heavy pushback on kind of putting an added burden on that sector. And this is something we have to take into account. I mean, just to mention a concrete example, even in the conventional sector, I'm only talking conventional now, the price for a Ukraine-used mass-produced and non-European standard production of chicken breasts costs for the gastronomy half than an Austrian, let's say, higher standard level produced chicken breast from Austria. On that basis, we have to talk about how prices actually reflect the actual damages or contributions to public goods. And I must say, this is a sentence that comes out from Commission. It's DG Envy in that case. The motto of going along with public money for public goods. This is what we have to take as a main role model for all our agricultural fundings, and we have to make sure that the using the right methods, the long-term sustainable methods is granted, is rewarded, is actually leading to a price where farmers can make their living off, and all the strategies that actually do not take into account the externalized damages that are done on air, on soil, on water, on biodiversity, name it. This has to be reflected in a pricing. And I'm quite optimistic also about the relations towards importations, linking to the question whether how do we deal with food importations into Europe? And I mean, the last 20, 30 years, what we basically did in Europe is we financed European agriculture production with taxpayers' money to actually create a produce price that is far below production costs, just to be able to take part in the world market of agricultural goods. And this strategy needs to be revised completely. Yeah? And we need to have fair play for our farmers. What we can't do is raise the standards, and this is a danger, raise the standards within Europe and not apply the same standards to imported goods. And this counts for the whole sector. And this is one danger that I see if we only raise European standards, the way we are now proposing it and how the Commission proposes it, and we don't put these tolls or importation restrictions on imports, we will face heavy troubles for the farming sector to be able to maintain that kind of production that is wanted by European citizens in an economically valuable manner.
Thank you, Thomas, because this is a very important point as well. And I would like to ask a question to Sebastian in this respect, because previously Thomas also mentioned, all the imports of soya that we have in Europe. I think it's around 70 million tons of vegetable proteins that we import every year. And IDRI made 2 years ago this foresight exercise about 100% transition to agroecology and organic farming by 2050, which also looked into these aspects, how to be less dependent on imported goods and animal feed in particular. Do you want to say a bit more, maybe, Sebastian, on these aspects? How is it possible to reduce the dependency, and what does it entail in terms of how we do trade agreements as well? Sebastian?
Thank you very much. I hope I'm unmuted now. The idea that I had is to say, internally, I think the main point is to say we need to substitute that soybean import by changes in our food system, particularly in the way we use feed, that we need less feed to feed our animals because we would change the animal production sector, and that we would also grow plant proteins within Europe. But the key question that we had not solved 2 years ago with the TIFA study is about the trade policies of the Union. And for what concerns the trade policies of the Union, I'm really interested in the fact that the Dutch Parliament has really taken recently a standpoint saying we need to reconsider the trade policies of the Union. And that's really showing that even the countries where export orientation is absolutely major for their economy, for their growth, there is a notion that we need to look again, to re-examine quite drastically what we do with the trade relationships with the rest of the world. That does not mean cutting off everything. We discuss a lot with the Brazilian partners. They need discussions with us if the environmental NGOs in Brazil, they need those trade negotiations with us in order to be able to push their own government towards less craziness. But we need to really reconsider to put sustainability as the first objective of trade negotiations, and then only trade as the means to do so.
Thank you, Sebastian. And maybe we still have time for a last question from the audience. Is there one available? So the process of developing the strategic plans is very much driven by the administrations, weak participation worsened by Corona. How does the Commission deal with this? So I think this is a question I want to address, of course, both to Tassos, but also to Olivier after that, because he mentioned the need for improved governance. So maybe Tassos first.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Since Olivier will come afterwards, I want to tell him also that we looked at the proposals they have made, and I think over 95 or 97% of what they have proposed in one or the other way we think are covered. I'm talking about the part. The important thing is not to make only proposals, it's how we're going to find a concrete way of putting them in practice. And the question is extremely pertinent because right now, what we want to do is have the wider possible consultation of stakeholders in the process by which member states are going to deliver their strategic plans. In the SWOT analysis we have followed so far, we see a very uneven participation and very uneven result, but we see, and that's the promising part, a very significant emphasis of what I mentioned before, on evidence that is publicly available. So we think that this public debate would allow, when we come to the level of looking at the strategic plans, and even before approving the strategic plans, in the exchanges we have with member states, we should be able to pinpoint the priorities we need to have. And again, as I said before, we should not go into the big details, but we should know in the big items. What do you do for soil? What do you do for air? What do you do for water? What do you do for biodiversity? Thanks.
Thank you, Tassos, and we're looking forward to these discussions on the specific plans as well. Olivier, could you maybe add a bit more on how we improve governance on the CAP in general and on negotiations on the national plans?
So, thank you, Eric. I think 2 points very briefly, thanking, of course, Tassos Aniotis for his remarks. First is that, as he said quite rightly, we cannot make these changes overnight. This is why a multi-year strategy is required and why we need to govern a transition from application and a mild incremental reform of the statu quo to something very different. That takes 5, 7, 10 years perhaps, and we need to gradually move to production and consumption that are much more sustainable. And this is why we need indicators of progress that allow year after year to see which progress we are making towards implementing the Green Deal plus objectives of the reformed CAP. And in this regard, and that's my second remark, food democracy is key. This is a policy, the common agricultural policy, that has faces enormous resistance because of the money involved, 58 billion euros per year, and many, many expectations. Perhaps 2/3 of the farms in the EU would immediately have to close without the subsidies associated with the CAP. And most of these subsidies go to the largest farms based on the hectares that they have under their control. So to change this, we need time. We need to gradually incentivize farmers to change production. We need to create market opportunities. And democracy is essential because otherwise, as I said, the veto power of the incumbents will remain very strong. Democracy is important to build legitimacy for change, to be more imaginative in the solutions we propose, and to ensure that all the concerns are responded to in this transformation we try to effectuate.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for this. And I am told that we have time for one last question, which is good news. So let's have a question then. Links between the Green Deal and the recovery plan. How to make sure 750 billion euros contribute to the Green Deal. We already had the view of Sebastian on that, so maybe I can turn to Sarah. Sarah, do you feel comfortable giving a few hints on how we have to make sure?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this question, so I think I'll pass it back to someone else in the panel.
Very good. So I'm asking for a volunteer to step in then. Yes, Olivier, please.
No, so very briefly, I think we should really commend here the Commission for having resisted calls from some that the priority should be the economic recovery, the Green Deal for the moment. What the 750 billion euros will serve to do, 500 billion of which shall be in the form of subsidies to states and 250 in the form of loans, is to dedicate 25% to climate action, and the remainder, the 75% remaining, will have to comply with the no significant harm criterion that is derived from the EU taxonomy on sustainable investment that was agreed upon at the end of 2019. In other terms, the 750 billion euros, this enormous stimulus plan, should serve the green transition and should serve the Green Deal. And I would like really to commend the Commission for having standed strong on this. Tassos Taniotis cannot say this because it would be seen as defending his own house. But I can say this. I think it's been very important not to lose this priority from sight. In fact, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity we have to change course. And as I think Thomas was saying earlier on, the choices we make now shall be decisive for the next 10, 15 years. The shape of our economy in 10, 15 years is being decided in these few months. So I think the Commission is very much on the right track in this regard.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And I think these are the perfect concluding words for our panel discussion. So I want to thank you all very much once again for participating to our Congress and to this discussion. So thank you, Sebastian, Sarah, Olivier, Thomas, and Tassos as well. And now I want to thank you all, dear participants, to the European Congress as well for following this session. And for more information about the rest of the program, I will now hand back the floor to Joyce. Thank you very much.
Hello, Eric. Thank you for doing a great job on that really interesting session in this memorable times, I guess. I see a lot of thumbs up and claps flying up now. So I think it was really interesting for around 350 people watching us. So let's look back briefly. What are your key takeaways when it comes to our sector in the post-COVID world?
In terms of key takeaway, I would say that the organic food and farming sector is well placed to be a part of a solution. And it's very good to see it recognized now by the European institutions and to see in general agroecological approaches as being important to be part of a solution in terms also in having to adapt to the consequences of climate change. And organic food and farming has a long history of thousands of farmers, processors, retailers, researchers innovating and looking for ways to improve their impact on the planet. So organic farming is very much a social movement and is already rooted at the local level, which is a very important space for innovation, like Olivier reminded us, but also Tassos reminding us that there is a lot of potential for innovation at the national level. So I'm convinced it can play a big role in overcoming this crisis and in the revitalization of our rural areas as well. But to mirror a bit the last words from Olivier, as we know, there is a very long way from the vision to the implementation. And to achieve change, we need bold and concrete changes in policies as well. And first of all, in the common agricultural policy, like we discussed. And much remains to be done. Like it was said, the next months are going to be crucial, almost a once-in-a-generation opportunity, like Olivier said as well. So honestly, we wish all the best to the German presidency. We hope that it will succeed in achieving an ambitious CAP reform and a good recovery plan that will contribute to greening our economies.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Speaking of which, the next month, we already listened to Stella Kyriakides from European Commission from the side of food safety and health. So, but the other directive general, that's really important, is indeed agri, you know. So we have a special treat on that because the Commissioner of Agri sent us a video statement, which I think you're really keen to hear now. So I guess, Eric, stage is yours, Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the Congress, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you at this important juncture for European agriculture. European food is well known for being affordable, safe, nutritious and of high quality. We are now concentrating our efforts on making European agriculture the global standard for sustainability as well. The Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy for 2030 both address the need to reduce the use and risk of pesticides, the use of antimicrobials and fertilizers in agriculture, and to ambitiously increase the share of organic farming. The European Green Deal puts sustainability at the heart of discussions about the future of the Europe and underpins the ongoing economy-wide and agricultural transition. Ladies and gentlemen, the Farm to Fork is our opportunity to demonstrate that a socially fair transition to the sustainable agriculture is not only desirable and possible, it opens many economic opportunities. Succeeding in this transition is the challenge we have taken upon ourselves. The new Common Agriculture Policy aims to provide strong support for sustainable practices as well as for farm income, because viable farms are prerequisite for more sustainable agriculture production. Promoting agrodiversity and better managed supply chains are also elements contributing to sustainability that will increase farmers' resilience to the aforementioned exogenous shocks. And obviously, ambitious targets on organic farming are a central element in our overall strategy. This year, the Commission will come up with an action plan on organic that we will be designing in close cooperation with you. With this action plan, we will work with the Member States and with all the key operators sector so that we better support the development of the production of organic food and increase consumers' demand and trust all over the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to continuing to work with you to make European agriculture an example of sustainable food system. I'd like to assure you that the conclusions and recommendations from the ongoing Congress will be duly taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Commissioner Janusz Wojciechowski. Wow, Eric, so what are your first thoughts about the little video statement he sent in?
Well, I think these are also very encouraging words, and I must say that I'm grateful to hear a Commissioner for Agriculture recognize the benefits of organic farming, but also recognize the key role that policy can play to further develop organic as well. So I think it's fair to say that from the point of view of IFOAM Organics Europe, European policy is really heading in the right direction on agriculture in food. At least that's the intention. And that the European organic movement is ready to do its part to contribute to more sustainable food systems.
Yeah, a lot of work ahead. But for now, I thank you for your great work you already did on that session, for moderation, that really interesting guests. And I think, Eric, now it's time we hand over to our last point of the agenda, the last highlight. What do you think? Looking forward?
Yes, of course, I'm very excited.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, 3 days of our first digital edition of this EOC are almost over, but we won't leave you and let you go without wrapping up that and have a short outlook in these exciting and demanding times. So please welcome back on stage the President of IFOAM Organics Europe, Jan Plagge, and Chairman of BOEWL, Felix Prinz zu Löwenstein. Hello, gentlemen. Good to have you back on stage here.
Hello, Joyce.
Hello, Joyce.
And starting with you, Jan, short answer to short question. Are you happy with the results of the Congress we have?
Yes, definitely. I'm very happy. When I read now already some summarizing thanks and comments in the chat, I'm really thankful myself that this experiment and this adventure really went well, and that we had so many participants. Over 1,000 participants joined during the 3 days, and we had more than 400 in the average of every session. So this is really a new experiment and makes me proud and happy.
Yeah, then we are all happy too, I guess. And Felix, when you look back at the last 3 days, what are you most content about?
I think I'm most content about that this new format worked. And in a surprising way, normally you would say it's good to have this internet event, but it's better to be together and to be able to talk and see each other. And when I watch the chat and see all the people communicating all the time, sometimes it was a bit difficult to see this screen, but it showed that people really felt as a community, really interacted. They were happy to meet each other. I have a problem. My ears are not tailored for this damn earphone. I try to have it back. And so this was a great experience.
Yeah, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, as last highlight of the EOC 2020, I clear the floor now and say, gentlemen, stage is yours.
Ich bringe mich um.
Das werden Sie nicht, Felix. So, hello everybody. Preparing this wrap-up together with Felix, I was wondering if wrapping up this Congress is the right term.
That's not.
And I don't think so. It isn't. And we don't want to bore you with a summarization of this Congress, because we had so many different messages, ideas, positions, experiences during this Congress. It is not possible to summarize. And everything is recorded, and all of us and even more people can watch after this Congress the details and many important messages. So we better should talk at the end of this Congress more about a rollout than a wrap-up. A rollout, is it what happens during these days and weeks at the beginning of the German presidency? It's a rollout of a new approach, a holistic approach for a food and farm policy for farmers, for processors, retailers, and the citizens. And we heard and discussed it during the 3 days. The farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy will be a game changer. The farm to fork strategy for us is an outstretched hand for all citizens, for all farmers, processors, and all other entrepreneurs, retailers, traders, and scientists to go for a cooperative approach in this urgent transformation process. But we have seen farm to fork is a new policy which creates massive resistance from colleagues, from farmers, from politicians who feel kind of denounced or just misunderstood when politics, NGOs, citizens describe the needs for a change. Thomas Waits, he reported this in these statements and many other experiences in their regions. So at the end of the 3 days of this digital experiment and experience, in these difficult and challenging times, remains some question. So how further? How should it go on when we come home, or we are all home, when we come into action? How do we want to achieve our goals together? As our German host and chair of the BOEWL, I ask you, Felix, what are your answers on this question? What is important now, and how do you do it in Germany to make the transformation happen?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say that when this farm to fork strategy has been published, the reactions were quite disencouraging. I mean, our minister talking in her press release about farmers not being landscape gardeners, and many others saying that after this corona crisis, we would have to talk about competitiveness first, and then to talk about the environment and climate. What an enormous misunderstanding. We have to make clear that there won't be competitiveness, there won't be economy, there won't be food if the preconditions for our food production disappear. I'm talking about biodiversity and a stable climate. So the discussion we still have to do, the debates we still have to lead. Sometimes they have to begin at the very start, times and times again.
So, but what does it mean for the organic sector in Germany now? So what are your political activities now, especially during the presidency of Germany?
I mean, it means that we have a bigger responsibility than ever. Because, of course, the 25% goal in this farm to fork strategy doesn't mean we want you to take the chance of this market opportunity. It means we rely on you, organic farmers, organic food producers, organic traders, organic consumers, to be a major agent of change. Stella Kyriakidis, she said it. Organic has to become a tool for that change. This we cannot be if we are not able to combine all our capacities and strengths, both in every country, in region, and in Europe. I'm quite happy that we succeeded back in 2012 to create BOEWL as an umbrella association where we have the entire food chain together. And this is very important because, of course, we need the state to help us doing our work, because what we are doing is we are organizing public goods. But we also need our independence. In this, we cannot have work, collaborate in this whole sector. And for example, something which still lays ahead of us in a big part is that we have to make those contribute to this effort who have a lot of money from selling organic products. I'm talking about the supermarket chains. Some of them already contribute, some of them do not yet. This is something we have to do. So all this is, of course, very much about advocacy, but it's also about many other things like how can we stabilize our production system, which is not stable 100% yet. There I'm talking about research. I'm talking about how to get researchers and farmers or practitioners in the whole value chain together with all their creativity that they have. And of course, how can we together reach the consumer and the society to make clear what kind of contribution we can do. Again, the state has to do very much, but the most credible ambassadors for us, it's ourselves. And this is why we have this great responsibility, and this is why we have to contribute not only to make organic stronger, but to make the whole food system sustainable. I mean, if in the same moment where the 25% goal was pronounced, there's another goal, the 50% goal bringing down pesticides. This also is somehow symbolic. It says the other 75% have to change as well. And we cannot sit back and say, that's their cause. It's our contribution that is necessary for that being possible. I have to put back my earphones.
You. Thank you, Felix, for these insights in Germany. From the European perspective, I must say, it's similar on one hand and very different on the other hand at the same time. What we perceive in many regions of our members is a growing fear of losing the ground everywhere. And with this fear and insecurity, the resistance against changes are growing, or a feeling of being lost comes up in a way. And we observe a lot of new actors in organic and asking ourselves, how can we integrate them into our values and our principles and our organizations? It's in many countries like France, Italy, or Spain, or in Northern Europe as well. So there's a lot of changes, and we know there's no good alternative to the upscaling of the organic system. But the fear of losing our organic values is spread widely and discussed in many IFOAM member organizations as well. So we have to take this serious. And on the other hand, there's a lot of engagement to further development of our sectors, to build up capacities in all regions, to further develop organization standards, and everything leads to the term which we was voting yesterday as a summarization of the second day session. And it's about cooperation. So the whole transformation, in my sense, and what we discuss is further developing our networks and our structures, how to cooperate inside of our organizations, how to even improve our umbrella organizations in the member states, and for sure to improve our European network. This is from the organizations, and the same has to happen in the value chains. So we never get fair prices if we don't sit around the same table, from consumers, retailers, processors, down to farmers and breeders, and so on. So the cooperation is the key term to make an action out of these political strategies we discussed during the 3 days. Saving our livelihoods is just possible with more cooperation. And if organic wants to take this outstretched hand of the farm to fork strategy and to be an important game changer, we should use it and even more cooperate together.
Thank you, Jan. You are so right. And cooperation is the key word that leads us now to the final task we have to fulfill, you and me, in this wonderful Congress. And this is a task of thank, because you're all aware that such an event could not happen if there would not be many, many, many hands and brains working together and make it possible. And this is why both of us, Jan and me, we have to extend our thanks now to many lot of people. And I want you to clap very loudly with your beautiful buttons in the end, because everybody who will be named now will reserve it. I'm talking about the IFOAM Organic Europe team in Brussels, especially Molly Matthews and Asta Donier-Leite, who spent a lot of time and sleepless nights to make this possible. Great, great persons. You see them all around here, in very small pictures, but you see that they are wonderful people to look at. And I'm talking about Lena Brisset, Thomas Haselberger, Katrina Gemme, Silvia Schmidt, Eva Bergmans, Verena Mitschke, Ilaria Barbonetti, wonderful people all together. And then there has been IFOAM Organic Europe moderation team, Eduardo Cocco first of all, and then Eric Gall, whom we saw this morning, and Emanuele Busacca. Thank you very, very much to all of them.
Yes, and I must say on behalf of IFOAM Organics Europe that the cooperation with your organization, with the BOEWL, was really exemplary and perfect. So thank you and to your BOEWL team so much. And I will mention, I see already my former colleagues from BOEWL in the pictures. And especially Teresa Dün, who was very much engaged with Molly and Asta in preparing this Congress, but the others as well, like Claude Blachette, Patricia Breuer, Farina Hermann, Babette Jansky, Friedhelm von Mehring, Jens Möllig, Mitja Seifert, Anke Spieß, Kevin Smith, Weismann, Tanja Barbian vermisse ich hier noch, die hat bestimmt auch was beigetragen. And Fiebel contributed as well, together with the BOEWL, Tanja Strobel-Unbehauen and Insa Volkers. And that was a huge and a big team. But we also want to thank very much our professional team from the studio in Düsseldorf and our agency, Copedius, who managed all this production from the script to the live shows. And I must say, I will miss all these dress rehearsals every evening together with you. It was really a pleasure with you. And we thank for sure all sponsors and all media partners. Without you, it wouldn't be possible to finance this Congress. Thank you very much. So now we forgot. We didn't forget one important person. You have seen the whole Congress, and who was really a wonderful host. It is
Joyce Mervius. Joyce Mervius. And I want you to know that Joyce Mervius in our BOEWL, she's responsible for public relations. And who could do that better than she? You must be all convinced now that the capacity for convincing public opinion, to convincing the published opinion, that this can't be done better than by Joyce Mervius. Joyce, you did a wonderful job.
Yes, indeed. And you will see her again a last time now with some last housekeeping at the end of this Congress. And from Felix and from me, I hope we see you soon. Take care and make it happen. Thank you on all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, last thanks to Felix Prinz zu Löwenstein and Jan Plagge. Great job for rolling out. And ladies and gentlemen, it's overwhelming. You were joining us from all over the world. We didn't expect that to be, that wonderful. So some housekeeping notes. If you could not attend everything or you want to rewatch some parts of the EUC, no problem. Every session was recorded. You'll find all videos and additional material within the next week online on our website, organic-congress-ifoameu.org. And of course, as you always know, like in a TV production, feel free to share with a colleague or a friend or people who may be interested in organic in action. So, and of course, the last words of our European Organic Congress, we would like to pass to the most important people, you. And we want to know how your experience was in our event. When I ask the next question, you have for the last time 10 seconds to answer. And our question is, what is your key takeaway of the EUC 2020? You have 10 seconds from now. All right, words flying in. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I see hope, cooperation, inspiration. So we take these words of you with us for our future work of IFOAM, Organics Europe and BOEWL. Thank you everyone for joining the European Organic Congress 2020 Organic in Action. We hope to see you next year in 2021 on EOC and maybe live again. So stay healthy, organic and awesome. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you for being part of the European Organic Congress 2020 this year. Organised by IFOAM Organics Europe and BOEWL, and with great support by our sponsors. We are looking forward to seeing you in 2021. Thank you and goodbye.